Hey, I'm Aswathy and you're with me on Module 3 of ELT series. Module 3 deals with major approaches and methods in ELT. You know there are several approaches and methods in ELT. We'll discuss some of them like the grammar translation method, the direct method, audio-lingual method, audio-visual method, communicative language teaching, CALL, that is computer-assisted language learning, structural method, functional notional approach, the silent way, suggestopedia, and community language learning. As it is not possible to discuss all of them in a single go, I have divided this module into different sections, each one dealing with a particular approach or method. Today, in this session, session 1, let's discuss the first and oldest method, that is grammar translation method. Grammar translation method is also called traditional method, classical method, and it is also known as Persian method in USA. Assume you watch module 1, an introduction to ELT. If so, grammar translation method might be familiar to you. Because in the introduction, I had mentioned grammar translation method as the oldest method of teaching languages. And for this method, it is not possible to trace back to the tenets of any particular expert or teacher because it was used to teach classical languages like Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, Persian, etc. It acquired its present form as a result of German scholarship. As it is believed to have its origin in Germany, the present form had its origin in Germany, or to be more exact, in Persia at the end of the 18th century. Some leading exponents of this method include German scholars like J. Sedenstucker, Karl Plotz, H. S. Hollendorf, J. Medinger. For more than 100 years, say from 1840s to 1940s, this was a popular method of teaching, especially European languages. This method was introduced in teaching of English in India during the colonial period. Surprisingly, modified forms of this method still used in different parts of the world for teaching English. And don't get surprised if I say a good number of teachers in Kerala, English teachers in Kerala, still make use of this method. The earliest grammar translation course for teaching English was written in 1793 by J.C. Frick. He published this book in Germany titled A Practical Course in English for Germans, A Practical Course in English for Germans. The word practical here means for practice, not the other meaning. The book contained translation exercises translating into and out of foreign language. Leaving the history there, let's see what this grammar translation method is doing in teaching of English as a second language. From its name, it's clear that it concentrates on two things, grammar and translation. According to grammar translation method, English can be mastered or learned through translation from L1 to L2 and vice versa. That means English can be learned through translations from or translating language items from first language to second language. Here it's Malayalam to English and also from English to Malayalam, L2 to L1. And learning of grammar of L2, learning of grammar of second language or that of English can be done by comparing and contrasting the grammatical rules of L1 and L2. That is comparing and contrasting the grammatic rules of first language and second language. So what is the learner doing in grammar translation method classroom? The learner applies the rules of grammar of L2 he learned in translating sentences and parts of texts. First language of mother tongue is a reference system. That is very important when you learn grammar translation method. The first language of mother tongue is a reference system in learning the second language. So how is grammar taught in the grammar translation method classrooms? Prescriptive grammar is taught. Prescriptive grammar is taught and it is taught using deductive or formal method. From prescribed rules to example, that is the way grammar is taught. Students learn grammatical rules by rote memorization and then practice those rules by doing grammar drills and translating exercises. Now, the second point, very important point, is word is the teaching unit. Word for word translation is done. leading to sentence translation. Accuracy is at most importance, and that means fluency is not important. Accuracy is at most important, is of utmost importance, and so there is explicit error correction for this maintaining accuracy, and there is a strong sense of right and wrong in the learning process. According to Thompson and Young, this method, the grammar translation method, is based on three principles. The first one is that translation interprets foreign phraseology or the phraseology of ELT or of English very productively. Second one is that through interpretation of foreign phraseology of ELT, the foreign phraseology means the phraseology of English language. Through interpretation of this phraseology of English language, it is better or effectively assimilated in the brains of the learner. The third one is that grammatical structure of the foreign language or that of ELT or English is comprehended fruitfully when compared and contrasted with the structures or grammar of the mother tongue of the learner. Now let's see how it is taught. The vocabulary is taught and learned in the grammar translation method classroom. Vocabulary is taught through isolated bilingual word list. Here isolated, that word isolated is very important, and also they refer to dictionaries. Mostly they refer to bilingual dictionaries. Then what happens in the class is they memorize words and their meanings. Focus is on two skills as far as grammar translation method is concerned: reading and writing. Listening and speaking you have to be very careful with that. Listening and speaking skills, both these skills are completely neglected. Mother tongue of the learner is used extensively in the classroom. As I told, vocabulary and grammatical rules are taught in isolation. That means that it is not linked to a context or to a live situation. Now, I'll just see a sample syllabus of a GTM classroom and how it looks like. Usually, there will be 8 to 10 prose lessons and 7 to 8 poems and a known detailed text. And known detailed text will be an abridged classic. In grammar, as part of grammar, what they learn is that they learn parts of speech, they analyze and synthesize sentences, all those things go along with grammar. Then written work includes descriptive and narrative writing, and also different forms of letters also they practice. The nature of textbooks. You find long extract from great writers, mostly uninteresting for learners. Linguistic quality is given at most importance, so learners' interest is not at all taken into consideration. It consists of long vocabulary list, written exercises, mostly translation exercises. For a long time, ELT curriculum in India was somewhat like this. Now let's see the nature of teaching learning in grammar translation classrooms. In teaching, the main concern is to cover all lessons in the book in a given period of time. Teacher reads the passage first, explains the content and meaning of new words or unfamiliar words of L2 to the learners in mother tongue. Rules of grammar are taught elaborately, as I told you before, followed by writing exercises. Teacher is totally dependent on the text. No scope for innovative planning for the teacher and innovative learning for the learner. The needs and interests of the learner are not taken care of. Learner is passive, completely passive in the learning process. Now, the two major expected outcomes of this method. First one is that it is to develop learners' reading ability to a level where they can read literature in the target language or in English. The other is to develop learners' general mental discipline through vocabulary and grammar drills and practice. Do you remember we discussed the difference between learner-centered and teacher-centered classrooms in Module 2? This method, grammar translation method, is a perfect example of teacher-centered method. Let's see the advantages of grammar translation method. The first one, it is an easy method and saves time. It is an easy method for the teacher as well as for the learner. Students proceed from known to unknown. That is important. They proceed from known to unknown. He or she already knows his or her mother tongue, and now he or she learns English equivalents of mother tongue. Second second advantage is that it saves teachers labor. Teacher finds it very easy to prepare lessons. He or she doesn't have to think of the ways and means of explaining words or content. It does not require the use of audiovisual aids also. The third one, it helps in building and or enriching vocabulary. The method helps in the rapid expansion of vocabulary in learners as it avoids difficult definitions and lengthy explanations in English, as vocabulary is economically and effectively learned through one's mother tongue. Now, the fourth one, comprehension can be easily tested. Learners' comprehension of English can easily be tested because the comprehension, it means understanding or how good they grasp the content. Especially at the primary level, it is very useful if you ask them questions in the mother tongue. Some educators feel it's good if learners are allowed to answer in mother tongue because many learners will be hesitant to use English or L1 because they're not proficient enough at the primary level. If they're allowed to speak in mother tongue about L1 content, about what they learned as part of English, they might be getting a sense of achievement. This can again motivate learners to learn L2 further. Now, the fifth advantage is that grammar can be taught easily. Grammar of the foreign language or L2 is taught easily by comparing and contrasting it with the grammar of mother tongue or L1. So that is easy for the teacher and for the learner. Now, the sixth one is interest in the art of translation can be developed. This is a very important point because translation is a major area of study and development for bilinguals and also multilingual people. So this method can help learners to develop skills in translation. It can be used in overcrowded classrooms. That is a greater advantage that we find in India. It can be used in overcrowded classrooms, where individual attention is a tedious thing for the teacher. Now, the eighth one, it helps in developing writing skills. I think it, to some extent, not that it helps in developing creative writing skills, it helps to develop in writing to some extent. See, learners' writing skills are developed through translation and also through some writing exercises, simple exercises like fill in the blanks. Now to the disadvantages of grammar translation method. The first one is that it is an unnatural method. The natural order of learning a language or any language is following the LSRW order, that is, or pattern, that is listening, speaking, reading, writing order. This method does not follow, this grammar translation method does not follow this natural order. It is more or less, it starts with the reading and proceeds to writing. Other two are completely neglected. The second point, I'm coming to the second point, that is it neglects speaking and listening in the target language, that is L2. And somewhat, what happens in the classroom is that most of the time, learners learn about the language and not the language, and thus become poor speakers and listeners in L2 or English. The third disadvantage is that it ignores habit formation in L2 or in English. Learner never acquires the habit to think in English. Through this method, instead he or she first thinks in his or her mother tongue and translate his or her thoughts into English or L2. According to ELT experts, a person cannot be said to have learned a language unless he or she has formed the habit of thinking in the same. Now, the fourth one, exact translation is impossible. Languages are a result of history, tradition, culture, and life of the people speaking them. Is it not? So, exact translation from one language to another, at times it is impossible. For example, the translation of words like payasam and pudding, it loses much of its flavor and sweetness in the process of translation. Am I not right? Though matured individuals, we know that the theories of translation, we have studied the theories of translation, and it tells us to leave these words like that. But it comes only at the later stage of studying a language, not at the early stage of learning the language. And again, idiomatic expressions are difficult to translate. It might turn absurd if you translate expressions like there is a black sheep in the class word by word. Then some linguistic items cannot be translated into mother tongue, like articles and the. Now to the fifth point, it teaches English by rules. The method teaches English by rules rather than by use. It is known fact that to speak any language, leave English, any language entirely by learning rules is quite impossible. This method does not help in the development of linguistic competence of the learner, as there is no scope for natural language use in the classroom. Learners are passive. That is the next disadvantage. The learners are passive. Learner is not an active participant in the learning process. It is teacher who is active most of the time, translating words and sentences, teaching grammar and vocabulary. It is done for better comprehension. What do learners do then? Learners most of the time are engaged in rote memorization of content and vocabulary and learning structures through mechanical drilling. We are sure of the fact that it is an uninteresting method. As said before, it is dull and mechanical. No teaching aids are used to make lessons interesting, and there is no live use of language in the classroom. There is no scope for creative and critical thinking. Absolutely, there is no scope for creative and critical thinking in the classroom because there is no interaction at all. Just, learners are mugging up the portions, grammatical items, and also vocabulary in the classroom. Now, the dominance of mother tongue in the classroom. In learning, we are learning a second language, English, and what you find in this method is that there is a dominance of mother tongue. In actual practice, the use of mother tongue may become dominant than ELT in the classroom, and the learners get exposed to mother tongue more often than second language, that is English. This eventually cripples the learning of second language or English. There is zero interaction in the classroom. There is no creative interaction between the teacher and the learner and also between the learners. Language is basically for interaction and for communication, is it not? So if that is not happening in the classroom, how can learners learn ELT effectively? Now let me conclude. Despite all these drawbacks, it is a fact that grammar translation method is still the most widely used method all over the world in English language teaching. Along with that, we should also accept the fact that that's been proven by researchers that one of the reasons for the decline in the standard of English in India is a wide use of grammar translation method. I think we shouldn't forget a point here, that is, grammar translation method was originally designed to teach languages which were not ordinarily spoken, but read and understood. We call these languages as dead languages like Latin, Greek. This makes it clear that grammar translation method is not suitable for teaching learning living languages where there is high need to develop speaking skill. So now think. Is it suitable? Is it a suitable method for teaching English, which is a very live and living language? I hope you understood what grammar translation method is. If so, ask yourself, what features of grammar translation method do we still retain in our English classrooms? And how can we replace it by more effective methods? Anyway, I'll be meeting you with more effective methods of ELT in the coming videos. With that, bye-bye. We'll be back with direct method in the next session. Take care.